Hey you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 36, season 2. Super excited to bring you today's interview with Gabe Brown of Brown's Ranch in North Dakota, where his home farm, now run by his son and his son's fiance, is 5,000 acres. Much of that is in crop ground and pasture, with about 15 acres in no-till vegetables. And we kind of dive into all of it. What's used to manage that amount of land, how the products are distributed, some technical details on incorporating animals, and a whole lot else. It's definitely a different scale of agriculture than I've largely reported on here, but it's also all very familiar. The cover cropping, the soil management, the photosynthesis, all of it. So, super excited to bring it to you, and I could not bring it to you without the help of today's show sponsors like Farmers Web.
Farmers Web software makes it easier for your farm to manage working with your buyers. By lessening the administrative load and increasing efficiency, Farmers Web helps you save time, reduce errors, and work with more buyers overall. Our free account includes features to manage your real-time and coming soon product availability, and tools to create your own availability calendar to inform buyers on the seasonality of your products. The free account also includes access to the Farmers Web Guide to Working with Wholesale Buyers, which offers pro tips and best practices on how to work with restaurants, schools, and other similar buyers. A 1-month free trial is available of the paid account, which includes features to manage your customers and orders, give select buyers special pricing and payment terms, track your buyers' payments, send invoices, keep detailed sales records, and much more. You can even manage orders for buyers who don't place them online. Access a demo video and learn more at farmersweb.com.
Also sponsoring the show today, BCS America.
BCS two-wheeled tractors are often referred to as the best tiller on earth, which makes sense given that the rear-tine tiller is our most popular attachment. Recently, a growing number of folks have begun to see till as a dirty word. No-till and low-till methods certainly have their benefits, but the BCS tiller attachment has a new trick up its sleeve for growers that are concerned with inverting soil layers or over-pulverizing their soil. The Precision Depth Roller accessory, or PDR, is now available for 30-inch BCS tillers, and a 26-inch version will be available in early 2020. The PDR gives BCS owners precise control over the depth at which they engage their soil, from half an inch up to 7 inches deep in half-inch increments. Perfect for mixing in soil amendments while chopping up any leftover plant residues. And the PDR's expanded mesh roller gently levels the soil, leaving behind a perfect seedbed. The PDR is on sale now. Check out bcsamerica.com for sale pricing and to find your nearest dealer.
All right, enough from me. Let's get into this amazing interview, second to the last of the season, with Gabe Brown of Brown's Ranch. Gabe Brown, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be with you today.
And good to have you. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your farm. Where are you located? How much acreage you're working with there? And those sorts of things.
Okay. Brown's Ranch is located right next to the city of Bismarck in North Dakota. The ranch consists of about 5,000 acres. Of that, we have approximately 3,000 acres of grazing land, both native pastures and land that we've seeded, cropland that we've seeded back to pasture. And then we also have approximately 2,000 acres of cropland, and we grow a wide array of different cash crops, everything from corn and spring wheat, barley, oats, winter triticale, hairy vetch, and we do put in about 15 acres of vegetables each year also.
That's great. Okay, so when you say 5,000 acres, is that a typical size for that area, or would that be kind of considered a larger farm?
For our area, it is pretty much just an average size farm or ranch. I have one neighbor, for instance, who farms 40,000 cropland acres. A small farm in this area would be around 2,000 acres. It would be a bit difficult for someone to make a living if they were selling into the quote unquote conventional market with 2,000 acres.
Okay. All right. So I want to kind of approach these in a few different ways because I want to talk a little bit more about both the 15 acre sort of vegetable plot, but also that 3,000 acres that you have in sort of the corn and those different crops. Let's start there. Let's start with those 3,000 acres. Can you kind of describe your general soil management there? And then I want to talk about some of those products and how you're distributing them.
Sure. It's about 2,000 acres of cropland that we have, and those 2,000 acres are farmed 100% zero till. We have not tilled the soil since 1993, so we're a long time down the no-till path. We do not have a set crop rotation. Instead, we are very adaptive according to conditions, whether it be moisture, which is somewhat limiting in our environment. We get about 16 inches of total precipitation a year, approximately 10 to 12 inches falls as rain, and then the remainder of it comes in the form of snow. And our crop rotation varies. We will actually no-till right into the previous year's residue that we leave on the soil surface in order to cover and protect the soil from wind erosion, water erosion, evaporation, and it also inhibits weeds from growing. We use very little chemical. Most of these 2,000 acres have not seen any chemical in 7 years. We use no synthetic fertilizer, no pesticides, no fungicides. We do integrate livestock onto the cropland. Once we grow that cash crop and harvest the cash crop for grain, then we will no-till in a cover crop. Realize that we only have about 110 frost-free days each year here, so our growing season is very short. However, these cover crops we seed will be frost-tolerant cover crops. In other words, they can withstand a frost and keep growing. That allows us to extend the time that we're able to take elements out of the atmosphere and through photosynthesis convert them into all these carbon compounds that go to feed soil life and enhance the ecosystem.
All right, so with that 2,000 acres, like what was the setup process to get that into something that you could no-till, or did you just start drilling seeds into whatever was already existing there? What's the sort of history with setting that up?
And so the ranch we're on was farmed by my in-laws for 35 years, and they practiced heavy tillage. You know, they plowed or disked the field numerous times during a growing season, before and after the cash crops. And I had just read enough and learned enough to realize that was detrimental to soil health, and that I would be better off if I would quit tilling. And so in order to do that, I simply sold my tillage equipment and bought a no-till drill and started no-tilling, and we haven't looked back. So it's not a difficult process to do. I don't care if we're talking the size of a garden or thousands of acres. You just have to quit tilling. The most difficult process is convincing yourself and learning that tillage is actually detrimental to soil health and to the quality of the products that's being produced or grown there.
Right, and since you've done that, have you seen the quality of your products go up? I mean, is it more consistent, less disease issues, those sorts of things?
Yes, all of the above. What really happens is the first thing, you're starting to repair soil structure. And we need to learn about soil function in order to understand this. So soil is based on soil aggregates. If you look at your soil, it should look like a dark, rich chocolate cake. It should have all these little crumbs, or what we call aggregates. Well, those aggregates are really sand, silt, and clay particles that are bound together by carbon compounds. And those soil aggregates will only last about 4 weeks. After that time, they're consumed by biology, consumes the glues that hold them together, and then new ones need to be formed. Now, if you till, you're gonna destroy that. You're gonna destroy those soil aggregates. Well, then you need to understand that biology lives in and on thin films of water surrounding those soil aggregates. And it's biology, of course, that makes the nutrients available to the plants. So that's the start of the nutrient cycle. So anytime we till the soil, we're destroying the home for that biology. And if there's not that home for biology, then the plants are going to be less healthy. So as we quit tilling and soil health improves, then that biology improves and proliferates, that provides more nutrients for the plant. A healthier plant is going to be less prone to diseases, to pest infestation, and that's one of the reasons that we no longer need to use those pesticides and those fungicides and those herbicides on our cropland and on our garden, for that matter. Also, our garden has been no-till for 20 plus years also.
Yeah, that's great. I'd like to get into the garden in a minute. I often equate like the sort of carbon cycle to eating. It's not a perfect analogy, but we can't just eat one sandwich and be good for life. And I think that's kind of how the soil works too, right? You have to constantly be putting carbon into it, and expecting some of that carbon to be respired out. And so you feel like cover crops have been one of your best approaches for doing that.
Cover crops with animal integration. It realized we need to look at our garden or our farm or our ranch as an ecosystem, because it is an ecosystem and it takes everything in order to make that a healthy ecosystem. And we also need to realize that, I'll use this analogy. Say if you have a tomato plant, okay, and that plant grows up, you have the vines, you cut that plant off and dry it out. What's left there in that plant is approximately 97% of what's left there is carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen, those 4 elements. Well, what do those 4 elements have in common? They're found in the air. Okay, so our goal as a gardener, a farmer, a rancher, is to take those elements out of the atmosphere, and we do that via growing plants. Through photosynthesis, they're able to take those elements out of the atmosphere, put them into the soil or into themselves in order to keep these elements cycling. So that's our whole goal, whether it be with cover crops or cash crops, vegetables, which are cash crops also, is to take those elements out of the atmosphere, put them into the cycle, and that drives the production system.
And one of the things you're known for is having pretty diverse mixes of cover crops when you're doing this as well. Is that still, have you kind of nailed down the mixes that you like, or do you still kind of go with as many different crops as possible?
We use nature as our template. If you look at a truly healthy native ecosystem, walk out into a healthy prairie or into a healthy forest, you will see that it's very, very diverse. There's not just one plant species out there. There's dozens upon dozens of different species. Now, obviously, in gardening or farming, you're not going to be able to purchase and seed 100 different species. But we can certainly seed 10 to 20 different species. And what that does is each plant has the ability to send off different amounts and different types of root exudates to attract different biology to cycle nutrients. So the more diversity you have, the healthier your soil's going to become. Now, what I've done over the years is I know which species grow best in my environment. So we tend to use mixes that we've proven over time work in our environment. And every environment is a little different. The principles I'm sharing with you will work in any environment because they're simply the principles of nature. The species we use will vary. Obviously, where I am in North Dakota, I'm not going to grow tropical plants here in North Dakota. We have to put it in what we call context for our environment. And sometimes it just takes trial and error to find out what works best in your own environment.
Right. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the different crops that you grow and how you distribute them, because it's not, you mentioned corn, but in general, you're not just growing your typical sort of commodity crops, right? I mean, what are some of the crops that you're producing there, and what does the sort of sales and distribution of those crops look like?
Sure. So we grow a wide variety of different cash crops. We grow corn and spring wheat and barley and oats and winter triticale and cereal rye and hairy vetch. And what we like to do is add value to those. And how we add value is marketing many of those crops as seed, for instance, or as feed. We don't use any genetically modified organisms. And so we have a market for that. A lot of people who are buying feed from us, grains for feed, they don't want to feed their livestock any grains from genetically modified plants. And so that's adding value to us. And so we'll harvest the crops. We will clean the seed. By that, I mean take out any straw, chaff, or broken kernels, any weed seeds, and then we'll market it as seed or as feed. And that adds value.
And when you're, okay, a little bit back to the management practices. So just thinking about some of these crops, what are you doing what does the termination of the previous crop look like before you drill the next crop, the cash crop?
Sure. So I always say that every location around the world has its unfair advantage. What does your location and environment allow you to do that it may not in others? Well, in North Dakota, one of our unfair advantages is we get winter. Winter will kill about anything up here in North Dakota. So the cover crop that we grow the previous year, that will be terminated by winter, by the freezing temperatures. In the spring, what you find then, due to the amount of snow we get, that cover crop, and plus the fact that we often graze those cover crops with livestock, any remaining residue will be down on the soil surface, and that's where we want it. We want it to be down on the soil surface to protect the soil and to feed soil macro and microbiology. Well, we're able with our equipment, our no-till equipment, to seed directly into that residue. And that provides the protection. It also helps keep temperatures cooler in the summer because that soil is covered with that residue. So we use winter to our advantage to be able to seed into that residue.
Yeah, that's great. I sometimes wish we had more winters. This year, our oats didn't even winter kill, so that was kind of that's been problematic for the spring so far. And I appreciate your positive spin on that of thinking of what our unfair advantage is. I'm not sure what Kentucky's is yet, but maybe it's our rainfall.
Well, let me just, if I may, just expand on that for a moment. Okay, you said that your oats did not winter kill. Okay, in my environment, if I had that happen and the oats did not winter kill, I would just use the oats then for the next cash crop. See,
Right.
one of the things in regenerative agriculture that we really tout is the ability to be adaptive. So nature's going to throw you a curveball, so to speak, from time to time. Take advantage of that and just use it as a positive. So what would Gabe do if he was in Kentucky and had oats growing? Well, I would put livestock on it, grazing it, if I was able to. You take lemons and make lemonade, so to speak.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I feel like that's not. I think about you being up in North Dakota with probably a lot of farmers who don't necessarily farm like you, and don't necessarily think like that. And what is it? How does your sort of farming practices? How do they resonate locally?
Well, I tell people this: back in 1994, when I started no-tilling, I believe I was the first 100% no-tiller in the county. I was the first farmer in our county to go 100% no-till. Now today, 75 to 80% of the cropland in Burleigh County, North Dakota, is no-tilled. So as a rule, no-till has been adopted. Now, there's not many farmers who grow the diversity of cash and cover crops I do, but there's some, and it's catching on. You know how it is. Sometimes the last people to change are the neighbors. They don't want to admit that a neighbor of theirs might be doing something right, but you just gotta educate those who want to be educated and realize that's up to the individual. I'm not going to try and force what I do and my practices on anyone. In saying that, there's a real surge in demand for the educational aspect of regenerative ag and these practices. And we're seeing more and more people all over the world start using these regenerative practices.
Okay, so maybe let's get into the vegetable production a little bit. 15 acres. What kind of vegetables are you producing? And are they wholesale vegetables, or are you doing some sort of farmers market, sort of retail, local sales with those as well?
Right. So we grow a wide array of different vegetables. Almost all are heirloom varieties. Just like the grains we grow, we try and source our seed, much of our seed for our grains, I should have mentioned. We propagate ourselves and have kept the seed back for 20 plus years. Okay, and so it's highly adapted to our environment. Well, the vegetables also, we prefer the older heirloom varieties. We grow all kinds of vegetables, everything from sweet corn and green beans and peas and pumpkins and cantaloupe and watermelon and tomatoes and peppers and spinach and lettuce, and the list goes on. And so we grow these no-till. What we're doing on the larger scale, we have permanent gardens that every year, it's been a garden for 20 plus years. But then we also do 10 to 15 acres normally of vegetable production, and we do that right out in our larger cropland fields. We prepare that the year before by growing a diverse cover crop mix, allowing the livestock to graze that in the late fall, early winter, and making sure that they don't overgraze it. We're leaving plenty of residue, normally 2 to 3 inches of residue on the soil surface in the spring. And then we're able to no-till in there our vegetables the following spring. And how we'll do that, we have a monosem planter that's able to singulate the seed, and the rows are set up on a 30-inch spacing. So we will go in and, for instance, we will plant our sweet corn on 30-inch rows, and then we'll come back and offset 15 inches and then plant, for instance, green beans in one hopper and peas in another. So what you have is you have a row of sweet corn growing, and then 15 inches on one side of it will be a row of green beans, 15 inches on the other side, a row of peas, for instance. That way, when we harvest them, and we're harvesting all this by hand, the rows will be monoculture, so you can just walk down the row of corn and harvest sweet corn, or you walk down the row of peas and harvest the peas. But we're getting the synergies that occur between plants. That benefit coming because we have the diversity in the larger field.
Right, that's great. Okay, so just so I have it, you're basically doing very similar to what you do with the cash crop section. You're setting it up with the cover crop the year before, and then the next year you're presumably going into what has been the same way, where the winter kills all that cover crop, so you have kind of a blank slate. And then you're drilling into that. Would that be accurate?
That is accurate. Yes, that is accurate.
Are you doing any transplants, like with the watermelons and that sort of stuff, or is all that direct seeded as well?
The watermelons, cantaloupe, pumpkins, those type of things are direct seeded. We do transplants of tomatoes, peppers, more of those crops that take a little long for our environment to start from seed. And the transplants are only put in our permanent gardens. The large scale areas are left for species that we can plant from seed.
Oh, okay. Maybe I didn't realize that you kind of rotate that 15-acre vegetable plot.
We do. That gets rotated anywhere on the farm. Typically, it's a bit near the farmstead, just for ease of getting to it for harvest. And you had asked the question about how do we market these. So besides our vegetables, we raise grass-finished beef, we raise grass-finished lamb, pastured pork. We have 1,400 laying hens out on pasture, so we sell eggs. We do broilers, both chickens and also some turkeys. And we market all these products directly to consumers, primarily via a website. And people can go on our website, and there's a shopping cart on there. They can shop online. They pay for it with a credit card online. And then they have the option. We can ship it directly to their door, or we do deliveries to cities throughout North Dakota once a month. And so they can come to our drop-off points and pick the products up there. Right now, we have about 8,000 customers that are buying from us at various rates. Some of them purchase every month. Some purchase just larger quantities several times per year. But it's how we market the vegetables also. During the summer, we'll set up at a farmer's market, and we'll be selling our proteins and our vegetables at the farmer's market, but people can also come and pick up the products that they ordered online from us. And so our goal is to sell the products as local as we can. Realize North Dakota, there's only 730,000 people in the whole state. So our idea of local right now is the state of North Dakota.
Right. Yeah. And one quick question about, you said that, so you're rotating the 15 acres that has like the corn and the beans and those sorts of things, the seeded crops. How big is the area where you're planting like tomatoes and peppers and the transplanted crops?
Yes, that we have two permanent gardens. The one is approximately 100 feet by 150 feet, and another one is approximately about 40 feet by 30 feet. Those are our two permanent gardens where we will do the transplants.
And do you manage those any differently, or are you still just kind of doing the same cover crop, let it kill?
No, those are managed differently. And the reason being is many of the species in there, it takes our full growing season and there's not time to get a cover crop established. So what we do there is in the fall of the year, we take second cutting alfalfa hay and we cover the entire garden with that second cutting alfalfa hay. And what that does, that provides the same arbor, the same residue as would a cover crop. And then the earthworms and all the biology consume that hay. In the spring of the year, is all we do is part that old hay and put our transplant in there. It also inhibits weed growth and weeds from germinating, and it provides the food for all the biology. Works extremely well. We're also, of course, within the garden rotating the species, the varieties of vegetables that we're seeding from year to year.
Right, and then, okay, back to that. Sorry, I'm skilled at jumping around, but back to the 15 acres. So when those crops, after harvest of, say, the sweet corn and the beans, probably closer to the end of the season, are you going through and drilling in a cover crop then? Or what's the process like once those crops have been cropped out?
Yeah, typically, like if we grew sweet corn and pumpkins, watermelons, it'll be too late in the year to get a cover crop, but we're going to bring our livestock onto them and let them glean from there. Once we've harvested everything we have wanted, we will let the livestock come in, whether it be the pigs and certainly the laying hens will go through there and they're going to eat any produce that we did not pick. Plus then, they add to the nutrient cycling. And so the following year, I'll be able to just directly seed a cash grain crop into those areas.
Okay. So with the animal integration, one of the concerns that I've heard come up over the years, because we do some rotational grazing, but we don't often let them into the gardens because one of the concerns we've had come up over the years is that they will compact the soil. So what's your sort of feeling about that?
Well, if you understand soil health and compaction's a function of time. And people who say, oh, livestock compact the soil, first of all, they don't understand that it's a function of time. And if you only have livestock on there for a very short time, they're not going to compact the soil. Also, the livestock, when they're on there, are grazing, for the most part, living plants. So that living plant cushions that soil, and there's no damage. We run a lot of livestock. We have over 800 head of beef cattle, and there's times when we'll have groups of 400 to 500 grazing a very small area, but they're only on there for less than a day, and then they're moved. Well, you're not going to have any compaction as a result of that. Its management is the issue, not the livestock themselves.
Right, and I imagine that some of the concern comes kind of simply from having, if you're maybe from tilled soils where you have these really loose soils that are really susceptible to compaction, and you put animals on that, that's probably not the best thing. And like you said, the living roots are going to protect it.
Right.
Hey, you all, quick interruption from me to get a word from a couple more show sponsors like Tilth Soil. Tilth Soil makes living potting soil approved for use in organic systems from food scrap compost in Cleveland, Ohio. Tilth Soil is committed to making outstanding growing media to help regenerative and organic farmers be as successful as possible. Their blends are suitable for seed starting and germination, transplant production, and indoor specialty crops. Learn more about their products at tilthsoil.com. Our show is also brought to you by you. You can join the other over 400 listeners who support our work through patreon.com/farmerjesse or through Venmo to @NoTillGrowers. Just kicking us a couple bucks over there and saying thank you is huge. But the Patreon page is what keeps this show going, and at a certain level on the Patreon page, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Adam Hensley, Bob and Ann Patton, Clara Coleman, C-Mac Small, Dan Breezebois, David Williams, Eric Posh, Eric Schlellner, Esoteric Culinary, Fiona and Donnie of Firefly Farm, Grant Timms, Jacob Arthur, Jared Kirst, Jay Armour, Jay McCombs, J.M. Fortier, John Mills, Kevin Keene, Liam Miller, Marc-Andre Giroux, Michael Madden, Mike Garcia, Patricia Jones, Ryan Gosser, Steve Larson, Tim Baldwin, Wild Mountain Seeds, William Henpin, and Yannick LaPlante. Big thank you to all of our supporters. That page is going to afford us another season of the podcast. Patreon.com/FarmerJesse. But we still got some more time with Gabe, so let's do that. Back to Gabe. I'm curious, like, what kind of, if somebody wanted to go into that 10 or 15 acres of maybe a handful of these sort of, kind of relatively higher profit or middle profit vegetables like the beans and the sweet corn and those sorts of things, what kind of equipment do you think is requisite there?
So what I did is I researched which manufacturers were selling a seeding implement that had the ability, it had to have the ability to singulate different sizes of seed. Because obviously, if you're going from a radish to a watermelon, there's considerable difference in seed size there. So I sought out a manufacturer that did that, and the one that I came up with over and over again was Monosem, manufactured in Kansas. They have different plates. It's a vacuum type planter. The seed is sucked by air up against the plate, and then it's released down the tube. They do have the plates that allow that singulation. And so that was one reason I went with them. The other thing that was more difficult was which can handle the heavy residue in a no-till situation. And so what I decided that the best route there with the Monosem planter was what's called a trash whipper, and it actually there's two spoked wheels that gently sweep a small area of residue aside, and you can adjust the pressure to determine how much of that residue you want moved aside, and then it allows the discs that go where the seed is placed behind the disc to cut a furrow, or in other words, a slice into the soil. And so that's what I look for, and that's why I bought a Monosem planter.
And are you doing any mowing? Like, are you just trying to get the animals to do all of that for you?
Mowing as far as...
on the crop ground. Like, you talked about the density issue. Like, does it ever get so bad that even the better seeders are not going to get through it?
No. The only thing I cannot establish a crop in is cement and asphalt. Other than that, you give me any residue, my drill and planter can handle it. That's not an issue today with the technology, the seeding equipment that we do have.
Are there other important considerations in that? I mean, you probably have to have a fit. Like, I'm just trying to think in terms of like having a powerful enough tractor to move it. Are there other considerations in terms of what you need to be able to utilize that seed drill effectively, or a seed drill effectively?
Yeah, it's just the horsepower requirements of the tractor, which are very minimal. And, I only bought a 4-row planter, which is 10 feet wide, because that was plenty big enough for for me. So I can do it with a relatively small tractor. Other than that, there really is no other requirement.
I love, in some ways, like one of the things that often comes up on this podcast is we talk about the simplicity of these systems. And I don't know what I expect from a larger farm doing it on the kind of scale you're doing it from. But it shouldn't surprise me that it's also relatively simple.
Yeah.
And it really just comes down to what you were talking about earlier, just maximizing that photosynthetic activity.
I tell people, and I write about it in my book, that I've become very proficient at being lazy. And if you observe nature, the hardest thing for man to do is realize that nature is self-organizing, self-regulating, self-healing. We as a species try to impose our will on nature. Why not work with her instead of against her? As in the case of me using winter to terminate my cover crops. Instead, most people, I got to go out there and spray glyphosate or some other product to kill the cover crop. No, let nature do it for you, and that's, I think, one of the things that allows our ranch this size to be so successful is we're working with nature instead of against her.
Yeah, embracing what I think about what you said with the oats. Maybe that's that sort of flexibility, being able to improvise is something that we need to start integrating into our gardening.
Right.
Staff. Okay, so we talked a little bit about hand picking all those beans and that sweet corn. What kind of staff do you, and then also, of course, you have all these, 3,000 acres of pasture and 2,000 acres of crops. What does the staff look like?
Yeah, and that's what surprises people the most. Technically, I'm retired. I have other business interests right now that keep me pretty busy. This past year, I was away from home 282 days out of the year, and we've turned the ranch over to our son. So our son runs the operation along with his fiance, and then he did have one hired man. Now the hired man did quit the end of the year, which we knew was going to happen, and my son decided that he didn't think there was enough to hire another person. So our staff consists of me when I'm home, with a little bit of time I am. My wife does the bookwork and helps out a bit with she cleans the eggs from the 1,400 land hens, and she helps out with some of the vegetable production. My son, who's 32 years old, and then his fiance works for us full time. That's the entire staff. We run, we have, as I said, 800 head of beef animals. We have several hundred sheep, several hundred hogs, 1,400 land hens, broilers, turkeys, plus the vegetables and the cash crops. But when you don't have to do all these other things, buying fertilizers, spraying herbicides, spraying pesticides, giving your cattle vaccines and all these things, it frees you up enough time in order to stack enterprises. So we really don't have much staff. That's all there is.
That's incredible. Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my brain around the idea of having just a handful of people to do that. And one of the questions I think I have is like, how do you get across 5,000 acres efficiently? What do you need to do that? Is it like a gator, a car?
Obviously we have a couple of pickup trucks, and we have 2 Rangers because our land is not contiguous. In other words, it does not all touch. We're spread out about 10 miles. My son lives on one of our farmsteads that's 4 miles from the main farmstead where my wife and I live. And so he drives a pickup or a Ranger back and forth. But realize when you're out there, say, for instance, moving cattle, and we do move our cattle every day during the growing season, it doesn't take you any more time to move 500 head as compared to moving 25 head. You open the gate, they're all going to go through because they know it's a fresh salad bar for the day. So it's just scale. The scale at which we do it, does not add really any extra labor to that.
In terms of like, for somebody that's interested in this, what are some of the factors that go into, keeping livestock and being able to rotate them in and out of these crop areas? I'm thinking that fencing and water. Can you kind of talk about some of the factors there?
Sure. So fencing today is extremely easy with the technological advancements in electric fencing. So our entire 5,000 acre ranch is fenced with high tensile electric wire that holds the cattle in. Now, sheep take a little more fencing. You need several strands of high tensile wire, sometimes even more, to keep sheep in. Hogs are very easy. They only need one strand, about a foot off the ground, and the hogs train very easily to electric fence. Our laying hens are truly free range. They can go wherever they want, but they tend to stay next to what we call our egg mobiles, and they're guarded by livestock guard dogs. We use those with both the sheep and the laying hens in order to protect them from predators. As far as water, we have pipelines throughout the entire ranch that take water from wells and then pipe that water around the ranch. And at various locations, we have these watering sites set up so the livestock can come and water. During the winter, our livestock live on snow. They do just fine on snow during the winter, with the exception of the hogs and the poultry. Those we provide heated drinking water so the water doesn't freeze.
And then those are just going into tanks that are mobile. Like, can you describe what in terms of the water? Like, I know that we worked on a rotational grazing. That's like where I apprenticed. We did some rotational grazing. We had to kind of dump our water container every day and then move it to the next paddock. Can you talk about how you've managed that?
No, we do not. We do not have portable water tanks. Instead, what we actually use is these large recycled industrial tires. They're 8 to 10 feet in diameter, and then they're set permanently at these locations. We probably have, I've never really added them all up, but probably 50 of these locations around the ranch. So within easy walking distance for the livestock. And we're moving our livestock so rapidly, we start near a watering point and then move away, and they just walk back for water, but they're only watering out of that particular point for maybe 3 days, and then they're on to the next point. So you don't have this compaction issue and this trailing issue that you often see. And those tires are just set permanently there. Now, we do this on leased land also, and if we ever lose the lease, you can easily pick them up and move them then. But it allows us then to not be burdened by that daily task of moving water.
Do you think having a diversity of animals is important? Obviously it brings some diversity, but do you think it's as important as, I don't know, do you think it's worth the amount of extra work and attention that it requires to manage two different kinds of animals? Or what are your sort of feelings on that?
And what I tell people is, again, it's all about context. We have the 5 principles of soil health, and we've added a 6th one, that being context. What fits your context? Do you have wooded land? Well, then maybe hogs fit. How much browse do you have? If you have a lot of browse, then maybe goats fit. So each person's context is going to be different based on their environment. Now, what we like, the reason we have so much diversity is a number of reasons. We have a lot of acres of true grazing land, rangeland. That's ideally suited to ruminants, cattle and sheep. Cattle and sheep consume different species. Sheep prefer the forbs, cattle prefer the grasses. So it makes sense to have them. We have grain, and with that grain, as I described earlier, we take out the weed seeds and broken kernels. Well, that's an opportunity. We have that feed source then to feed to the hogs and the laying hens. So they fit really well into our operation. The other thing that I think is very, very important is the more diversity you have resiliency in the marketplace. Okay. Too many people, for instance, they only grow corn or soybeans. That's all they grow. Their whole livelihood is subject to the price of those two commodities. Well, you look at our operation and what we do, all the different pastured proteins and the eggs and the vegetables, we have many, many different income streams. This makes us very resilient economically. Plus, when you're selling to consumers, they would much rather prefer to shop at one location. Our consumers trust us. We have an open door policy on this ranch. Anyone can drive on this ranch at any time and look at anything. That builds trust with our customers. They want to buy from us. Well, they prefer to buy more goods than just one or two. So that's another reason for us to stack enterprises.
Now, and I agree. I think often about there's a wine that's grown in the hills of Vienna, and it's called Gurmischer Satz, and it's like this. It's 14, 16 different varieties, and the reason that they planted it that way was because something would succeed every year. And I think that's a really important lesson. I also think, though, that it can be kind of hard to juggle all those different enterprises. What are your feelings around that? Like, what are some of the things you've done to make sure that juggling all those different enterprises, you're not overwhelming yourself with a bunch of different projects?
Right, and that again comes down to each individual preference and the context. I have always just been one. I love a challenge. Our son is the same way, and make no mistake about it, we're extremely busy during the growing season. We're doing a lot of things for a 6-month period of time, approximately. But that keeps it exciting to us. And are we overwhelmed by the workload? No, not at all. We just, it has to be done. And again, it comes back to how do you stack enterprises so that they're complementary and not overburdensome. And then you need to make sure that they're profitable. Otherwise, they're not worth your time to do it. And so, a lot of individuals come and look at what we do and they just shake their head. There's no way I'd want to do that. That's way too much. We don't look at it that way. It's a lifestyle we enjoy, and to each his own.
Right. I guess my brain was kind of going towards, like, do you all get a day off in the middle of the summer? And
yeah, and how I answer that is yes, if we want, but the old adage, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. Now, during the summer, several times my son and I like to go to Canada fishing. We will just we book it in advance, and we're not moving the cattle every day. If we're going to be gone, we just give them a larger area. So we go fishing for a week at a time. several times, and things just slow down that week. We don't go to farmers markets that week, and we don't move cattle every day, and make it easier for my wife and Paul's fiance to do the chores when we want.
Well, that's great. Gabe Brown, I really appreciate this conversation, and I really appreciate your work. The book, Dirt to Soil, is exceptional. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
All right, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to hang around after the credits. Per usual, I put in a little something extra, and Gabe and I talked for a few minutes after the recording, so that's there as well. Be sure to check out some of the videos of Gabe on YouTube, which we will put together for a best of this week at no-tillgrowers.com. We'll also put some links in the show notes. Also check out his site at brownranch.us and his book, Dirt to Soil. Both great. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you are getting it and leave a review. But this week, all reviews must be at least 1,000 times longer than the reviews I usually ask for. Big thanks to Jackson Roulette and Josh Satin for their help with the podcast, and a large North Dakota farm size thank you to my wife Hannah for all of her help behind the scenes. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
People make it too complicated. It's about following the principles of soil health, and I don't care what scale you're at, whether it's, a flower pot on somebody's deck in New York City or 5,000 acre ranch in North Dakota, the principles are the same. And you follow the principles, you'll truly produce nutrient-dense food. We didn't even get into the nutrient-dense topic on the difference in nutritional quality in food. That's a whole another topic in and of itself.
Have you noticed? Have you been able to measure that?
Yeah, we have. We actually have been measuring our pastured proteins for the fatty acid profile, omega-6s and 3s, and it's amazing what we're finding. Now, we didn't talk about some of the work that I'm doing with company Understanding Ag. We're actually involved in several large projects with General Mills where we're measuring the nutrient density of the grains and products being produced on regenerative soils versus those produced in more conventional type manners. And it's amazing what we're starting to see there. That's one of the things. Other things we're seeing, we were involved in a project this past summer where we looked at over 20 different regenerative farms and ranches across North America, and then neighboring farms or ranches that were either organic or conventional. And we were looking at the difference. We grew the same variety of grains, the same vegetables, etc., on each of these farms. And then we took those vegetables and grains and had them analyzed at a food grade lab for nutritional quality. And it's amazing the differences we're seeing. And one of the things your gardeners clientele listeners might be interested in is the difference between where there was tillage used and where it was not. It's pretty astounding. And for gardeners, they think, they need to go in and till the garden. Well, that's the worst thing they can do for nutritional density of their foods. And you think you're producing healthy food in your garden, but if you've tilled the garden up, you've destroyed the ability of that garden and those plants to provide you with the nutrient profile that you really need. And that's just fascinating. And we're going to be hearing a lot more about that. We're involved in several studies that are working with that.
Yeah, and if somebody wanted to see those studies, or what, can you maybe give us a list of who's doing them and where to find them?
Well, right now, realize we are contracted by clients. And so that information is the property of the clients.
Okay.
And so until they release it, I'm not liberty to disclose that. But it's coming. There will be one book out before the end of the year that will have that study in it.